Hello, everybody. Hello, welcome. Thank you so much for being here. I know that if you're around Boston, it's a little hot. Maybe the weather got you fleeing from being on Zoom, but thank you so much for being here. My special thanks go to the three panelists who graciously agreed to be with us today, and you'll hear more about them in just a few minutes. Just a few housekeeping things. First, I want to reintroduce to you to my right hand, Gina. Gina, say hi. So if you get messages now or later from Weijing Liao, that is Gina, and you can put the face and name together. She is my completely voluntary and completely committed outreach and events planner. Thank you, Gina. So she's going to be taking charge of the chat, especially if you haven't sent in any questions earlier. While you're listening to the presenters, please feel free to write your question into the chat, because then, time allowed at the end, we will take them on a first-come, first-served basis. Now, as far as the main event, first thing I need to say is that we are, I think, all aware that the subject we're talking about today deserves a whole lot more than the 90 minutes to follow that we know. The next thing that I am aware, and I know you are all aware, is that the seed, the triggering fact of this event is based on a horrible, horrible natural disaster that befell Southeast Turkey and Northeast Syria back in February 6th. Something that cost the lives of 50,000 people, maybe more, and many, many more livelihoods. Now, as far as Neighbors in Memory and its keeping with its mission, we talked among ourselves with the panelists, what can we do? We can certainly delve a little deeper and take a little bit more historical and political perspective. And while we're doing that, we can see if from the natural consequences to the political repercussions of what happened, if there is any way, any glimmer to talk about in terms of the relations between Turkey and Armenia, two countries that are obviously have been at odds with a border that is closed on Turkey's initiative for the past about 3 decades, I believe. Now, the other fact here is that both countries showed support for each other during times of crisis. Back in 1988, Turkey sent help to Armenia during their earthquake, and in February, Armenia definitely did the same. The question coming to mind is whether this kind of effort and support could ever translate into something further as far as softening the relations or having some amount of rapprochement. That is one of the questions that can be asked, or whether those acts of support will remain as temporary and fleeting acts of humanity. For this and other questions, we have a wonderful trio of guests. But before I introduce the first presenter, I do have to put something in front of you because this is the reality. It's April 14th. Today we're on Zoom. A couple of hours before this, there was a protest in front of the UN headquarters in New York because there was a protest about Azerbaijan and its human rights violations in Nagorno-Karabakh, which is Artsakh to many Armenians. Azerbaijan, as you know, is a supporter and is supported by Turkey and a very close ally of the government of Turkey. The other thing I have to say is that in the following weeks, as we get closer to April 24th, there will always be events commemorating the 1915 Armenian genocide, and it will be pretty much clear that for the world's Armenians, what happened to their people back over a century ago cannot easily be dissected and separated from what's happening to Armenians who are now under blockade by Azerbaijan. I know that is not a very rosy picture I painted, but these are the facts today. And as the title of the event said, we're not so much looking for a very big rosy garden, but glimmers of hope for the future, and see if we can find some glimmers of hope for the relations between these two countries. And with that, I'm going to turn over and talk about Soli, our first presenter. Now, you have to know, whenever I introduce one of our presenters, their actual bio is a whole lot longer than what I'm reading to you. So keep that in mind. Soli Özel is a senior lecturer at Istanbul Kadir Has University. Most recently, he was a Europe's Futures Fellow at Institute for Human Sciences in Vienna in 2021 and 2022. In the year of the pandemic, he taught a course at the American University in Central Asia and at the Menton campus of Sciences Politiques in Paris. He was a Bernstein Fellow at the Shell Center for Human Rights at Yale Law School and a visiting lecturer in the Political Science Department of Yale. He has been a columnist at Turkish newspapers and magazines such as Nokta, Gazete Pazar, Yeni Bin Yıl, Habertürk, and Sabah. Currently, he writes for Deutsche Welle Turkish, Politik Yol, and does a weekly commentary on world affairs for Gazete Duvar TV. He has held fellowships at Oxford, the EU Institute of Strategic Studies, was a Fisher Family Fellow of the Future of Diplomacy program at the Belfer Center at the Kennedy School of Government at Harvard University. He has taught at UC Santa Cruz, Johns Hopkins University School of Advanced International Studies, University of Washington, Northwestern University, Hebrew University, Boğaziçi University, Sciences Politiques, and Yale. And on top of everything, he's a member of the European Council on Foreign Relations. So Soli, I know this is a very interesting time in Turkey. We are anxious to hear your thoughts, how the earthquake has affected the atmosphere going into the election cycle in Turkey, and whether any potential rapprochement is something we can be talking about at this point in time. The floor is yours.
Thank you and welcome everyone. Good afternoon. I'm also in the States, therefore I can say good afternoon and good evening, obviously, to Gevorg. The earthquake was, I think, both in terms of its humanitarian consequences and political consequences, is going to be seen as a turning point. I think it is a turning point. Just a few numbers. 11 provinces were affected on the Turkish side of the border. 5 of those very roughly hit. About 232,632 buildings were destroyed, and in those buildings, 651,416 residential units have been destroyed or severely damaged. 2 million people are homeless. The region represents about, it has about 13.5 million people, so about 16% of Turkey's population and roughly around 9 to 10% of its economy. The initial estimates, based on only 46,000 dead, and I think yesterday the number was announced to be 50,500. I'm sure this is, unfortunately, it is a lot higher than that. But if we take just 50,000 dead, that will be, in terms of replacing all those units, it will be about $44 billion that will be needed for reconstruction. If the reconstruction has to be done not on the fault lines, but somewhat away from the fault lines, that will mean rebuilding the cities, rebuilding their infrastructures, and it is difficult for the moment to estimate exactly what the reconstruction costs are going to be. It is estimated that to actually keep those 2 million people fed and sheltered for 1 year will cost about 5 billion US dollars. And then the estimated loss of production is about $10 billion. Not to mention that supply chains are going to be disrupted because some of those factories feed the textile factories in the western part of the country. And finally, the share of the region in the agricultural production of Turkey is higher than its overall share in Turkish GDP, and therefore we're going to expect higher food prices and maybe scarcity of food. Now, this is really the cold picture in numbers of that earthquake. It was, of course, a humanitarian disaster, and it was also, in the way things have unfolded, once. But by the way, we had actually 3 earthquakes. Apparently, the first one was 2 earthquakes that happened simultaneously, 2 different fault lines, and 8 or 9 hours later, the second one also hit. And what was most striking for the Turkish population in general, what caused a very deep trauma, and I think now a growing anger, is the fact that the Turkish state and the organizations, the institutions that are responsible to take care of the population in such disasters were really either nowhere to be seen or were incompetent. And in the worst cases, they were an impediment to the help that was going to the victims of the quake. There are innumerable anecdotes and people who witnessed such things, and the voluntary organizations and the aid groups that came from abroad have all registered some of the horrible things that they have witnessed, and it really didn't look good. Well, it didn't really look good at all for the apparatuses of the state. However, the government actually, of course, denies that things were done pretty incompetently. And even today, the Red Crescent, having lost almost all its prestige and legitimacy, is suffering from a lack of blood supplies because people are not donating blood to the Red Crescent as we speak. This was, if you will, one picture that came out of the earthquake: an absent state, institutions that had been hollowed out institutions being run by totally incompetent people. And I mean, incompetence is one thing, totally insensitive people, as it transpired. So that was one picture, and it was actually a pretty bleak picture. The second picture was one of Turkish society, about Turkish society, an immense outburst of empathy, organizational skills, mobilization, outpouring of help, donations, and the ability to actually move things with or without state help, and on many occasions, in spite of the state's obstructionism. So that is something that personally gives me a lot of hope. If the earthquake did not happen, and if of all ministries, the Interior Ministry did not ask the entire world to come to our help, I would have expected a campaign period where especially West bashing would have been a primary pillar of the discourse of the government in the campaign. So one positive effect of the quake, I would say, has been that it made it very difficult, if not impossible, to actually go on an anti-Western track in the campaign, because the country, the victims, have seen for themselves, and remember that this is a pretty conservative part of the country. Many of the provinces that were hit voted for the ruling AKP-MHP coalition at rates around 75-80%. It is now very difficult to actually say that the entire world, and particularly the West, are enemies of Turkey, that they wish nothing but ill of us and all that. So, and in fact, so far anyway, although the campaign has not really kicked off totally, that part of what I would have expected in the campaign has not been touched, and that I think is all for the good. The big question, since we're about a month away from probably the most consequential elections in my lifetime, if not in the life of the Turkish Republic, which will celebrate its 100th anniversary centennial on the 29th of October this year. As we go to that election, little by little, the political impact of the earthquake is also becoming clearer. Obviously, the earlier polls could not really include the direct victims of the quake, but polls conducted in April, at the beginning of April, suggest that anger because of the absence of the state, anger because of all the things that I have mentioned, is finally mounting, and that will have an impact on people's political choices. It is quite intriguing to me anyway, that after nearly 20 years and a half in power, the AKP still commands as high a percentage of the votes as it does, around 30%. And Mr. Erdogan, the important person in those 20 and a half years in Turkey's politics, the dominant figure, in fact, almost the monopolizing figure of Turkish politics, still commands around 42% of support in the presidential election. I'm sure you're all familiar with Turkish developments, but just to refresh your minds, we'll have two elections on the 14th. We'll elect a president and we will elect a parliament. Now, this is a very weird system that we live under anyway. And in that weirdness, another probably abnormality is the fact that although the presidential election is a two-round election, the parliamentary election is a one-round election, which means that the parliamentary election may have an impact on the second round of the presidential election if we have to go to a second round in the presidential elections. Many people abroad who are interested in Turkey or follow Turkish affairs for a long time were not convinced by the Turks that they spoke with that come hell or high water, we would have those elections. Well, come earthquake and whatever else, we will have those elections. And of course, nowadays, the question is, okay, you'll have the elections, but what about the results? Will the results be honored? I personally think that yes, if the result is decisive, then it will be accepted and will move. And I mean, if Mr. Erdogan wins the presidency, it's basically more of the same. If the opposition leader, Mr. Kılıçdaroğlu, wins the elections decisively, that is, you cannot have endless recounts and stuff. I think the transfer of power is going to take place, partially at least, because the state apparatus already gives us some indication that many, especially in the judiciary, are beginning to sense that the winds may be shifting direction. We see this in the decisions of the Constitutional Court. We see this in the decisions of some local courts, where highly critical, politicized cases are decided in favor of people who would belong to the opposition. One of the felicitous results or consequences of the earthquake, of course, was that the Turkish government, which refused an offer of help by Greek Cypriots, they rejected, they accepted, and then they rejected finally, did indeed accept the offer that came from Armenia. The border was opened. The Armenian rescue teams have come to the region and helped. And afterwards, I think the foreign minister of Armenia also visited Turkey. That was not terribly surprising, I would think, because Turkey does have, or the Turkey and Armenia now have special representatives that negotiate the terms of their relations for the future. There was talk before the quake that maybe people holding third country passports could actually use the now closed border, and that would be seen, if you will, as a step in the right direction, or as a confidence building measure. But at the same time, of course, relations between Azerbaijan and Armenia have deteriorated. Gonca referred to a demonstration in front of the UN against Azerbaijan, as the Azeri government actually wanted to push things in its own interest, although presumably a negotiated solution was supposed to be in the offing. And it is also true that Turkey usually does not choose to defy Azerbaijan and will try to move in tandem with Azerbaijan. But my sense is, for a whole variety of reasons, and in terms of international relations, for structural reasons, following the Ukraine war, sooner or later, Southern Caucasus will have to find a certain kind of settlement. And maybe after these elections, especially if there is a change of government in Turkey, the new government, along with a new government which will be able to have more open and more perhaps trusting relations with Western allies, may actually be pushing in the direction of a settlement, but it will take time. I don't expect it to happen overnight, but I think, as in the case of Greece, the opening of the border, the presence of the Armenian minister, and the help that the Armenian crews have given are all steps in the right direction. Perhaps an Aegean Spring a la Turkey-Greece relations that happened in '99 and seems to be happening. My God, I mean, right before the earthquake, we all were afraid that there may be some kind of skirmish on the Aegean between Turkey and Greece. After the earthquake, it's love it. I mean, flourishing of a love affair, if you will. And the very hardline foreign minister of Greece saying things that really, I mean, you think you're dreaming. But a similar thing, perhaps again from a much lower starting point and probably at a much slower pace. It's not impossible to imagine that happening between Turkey and Armenia as well. Sorry if I took too long.
No, what you told us deserved that much time. Thank you so much, Soli. That brings to mind a lot of questions, but first we're going to go to Anna Ohanyan, and we're going to hear from her. Anna Ohanyan is Richard B. Finnegan Distinguished Professor of Political Science and International Relations at Stonehill College in Massachusetts, and a non-resident senior scholar in the Russia-Eurasia program at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. She's an author and editor of 5 books and numerous academic articles. Her most recent book is titled The Neighborhood Effect, The Imperial Roots of Regional Fracture in Eurasia, which was published last year by Stanford University Press. Professor Ohanyan has also consulted for numerous organizations such as the US State Department, United Nations Foundation, the World Bank, the National Intelligence Council Project at Maryland University, the Carter Center, and USAID. Her work has taken her across the globe from Northern Ireland to the Balkans, Russia, and the South Caucasus. She's a public scholar and has contributed to the BBC, Bloomberg, PBS, CNBC, Foreign Policy, the Washington Post, Al Jazeera, and the National Interest, among other media outlets. So Anna, the floor is yours, and we're looking forward to hearing from you.
Thank you very much, Gonca, for organizing, and big thanks to Soli for a really thoughtful presentation. And I'm looking forward to learning from Gevorg as usual. And again, taking the opportunity, I wanted to express my deepest sympathies to people who have family, Gonca, first of all, you, who have family, friends, communities in Turkey. And indeed, I mean, when Gonca and I met after the earthquake, we were talking about the parallels with the earthquake in Armenia, and I said that, yeah, corruption kills. That seems to be, because I was at the rates at the time the news were coming from Turkey, that the number of victims is so high, even when we consider the fact that this was a really high impact earthquake. So this is what but I do want to, and I will get to the earthquake, but I think I wanted to grab on to something that Soli said, in regards to high popularity ratings of President Erdogan, despite this massive scale earthquake, despite the collapse of the institutions before that, that essentially Turkish authoritarianism has deinstitutionalized state governance, deepening authoritarianism, etc. As Sol was talking about this as to how high his ratings remain with all of these issues in a backdrop, I kept thinking of Putin. I was reading about, again, about Russia and Putin's popularity ratings are also very high, despite the disastrous war. These are two very different conditions, two different types of states, two different, some were actually not that different types of leaders, but still. And what is interesting, I think the shared story that is emerging from here that I think is useful to talk about as it explains also the earthquake politics is authoritarian resiliency. As you read about Turkish authoritarianism, there's fascinating scholarship that is emerging, and I'll cite some later on. But there is an argument in one of the articles that I'll cite in a minute, is that the fact that the opposition is struggling is not necessarily because of the specific strategies of the opposition, but it partly has to do by the fact that the system in Turkey, authoritarian system in Turkey, institutionalized patron-client relationships, the patronage that penetrated into the society, and that is obviously the key core implication as to why the number of victims was so high as a result of the earthquake, why corruption kills. And paraphrasing essentially Bill Clinton, it's the institutions, stupid. Essentially, it's the institutional erosion that is explaining some of the post-earthquake impact. It's the institutional erosion, largely transactional and highly militarized foreign policy under Erdogan after 2016, both Turkish foreign policy in the Middle East, as well as in South Caucasus, as well with Greece. My argument is somewhat controversial, and I will get to it in a minute when it comes to Turkish foreign policies, is that despite this militarized, very adventurism, which will lead many to think, and Erdogan claiming how successful Turkish foreign policy has been, I would argue that Turkish foreign policy has been underperforming in these regions. And I will try to make an argument specifically on the Armenia-Turkey relations, and I will try to end there on that. Actually, I'm going to do something totally unethical, and I'm going to share this really, really good slides that a colleague of mine from Carnegie has shared. He delivered. The colleague's name is Sinan Ulcan. He's at Carnegie Europe. Let me just go to, and he was doing a presentation. I just screenshot it, so I just wanted to flag it. This is not totally ethical, but it does show. I thought the slides were very good, and essentially it captures what Soli already said. Some of the statistics: 11 cities affected, 16% of the population, 9.3% of the GDP, exports, debt toll. But I think Soli's point about the reconstruction costs that are mounting, that is obviously going to have a huge impact on Turkish already strained economy. Now, in terms of moving forward, so let's spend some time. I think I do find this link between authoritarianism, institutional erosion, and the impact of the post-earthquake politics is fascinating, simply because it was also a background condition during the Armenian earthquake. As in 1988, when Armenia was still part of the Soviet Union. A few words, a little bit on Turkey. As I was preparing for this, there's this very good piece by Sultan Tepe and Aisha Alemdaroğlu, published at the Journal of Democracy. And this was before the earthquake. And I actually thought it's fascinating as to what this research has produced and how consequential it is for the post-earthquake politics in Turkey. The title of their article is How Authoritarians Win When They Lose, essentially arguing that the post-election capture is a process. That's how authoritarian resilience takes over. And in the article, they go over and discuss cases of how Turkey, Erdogan, after losing local elections or losing support, municipal, etc., has essentially replaced elected mayors, mostly in Kurdish areas, essentially talked about specific mechanisms by which Erdogan essentially crystallized, captured the local levels of governments. Qayyum system was discussed. I don't know whether I'm pronouncing this correctly, but it was defined as a tool for Erdogan's carrot and stick approach to politics in the Kurdish regions. The reason that this is important is that this Qayyum strategy epitomizes a dual strategy of coercion and patronage, and it connects directly with the construction issues in the affected areas. Because, and I'm trying to find a direct quote. Just one second. In the Southeast undiversified economy, construction is the main source of business contracts, jobs, and housing, they argue. Since 2016, when the street battles between the PKK and security forces in Syria severely damaged many homes. Essentially, it goes on. It's kind of, this segment is focused on the Kurdish conflict, which is not very relevant at this point. But I think the point is being made as to how it's because of this Qayyum-controlled areas, institution that where the patronage was played out, there's really dubious business practices within the construction area were carried out. I just thought that was fascinating. They were not even talking about the earthquake. That it really came out so vividly. There's probably more research on this that I'm not aware of. Now, in terms of as I was thinking about Gonca, the conversation Gonca and I had, in terms of that corruption kills, corruption is indeed a political strategy. I mean, we might think that corruption is this innocuous, very innocent, not very damaging, right? It's something to be tolerated. But as we're learning, corruption is a strategic tool that is used by Russia to influence all of the post-Soviet states. Corruption was hugely consequential in the case of in the case of Afghanistan, and played a huge role in how poorly US presence was carried out in Afghanistan, the exit strategies, and the fact that in Afghanistan we're back to square one. And in the case of both Turkey and Armenia, Soviet Armenia, as I was thinking about this, I was thinking, well, could we even use the word corruption in the case of Soviet Armenia, where you essentially had a state-administered, it's a totalitarian system. It was a highly authoritarian system, so which was built on corruption. So this is not a systemic comparison of the two, but I think in the case of Turkey, you had patronage networks that had a direct impact on the ground. You had patronage networks in the Soviet Armenia as well, that had a direct impact. In the case of Turkey, you had erosion of local governance. There was not much local governance in Soviet Union, but Gevorg is much more knowledgeable on this, and I'm hoping he can correct me or agree with me later on. Corruption and nepotism, poor standards of construction, very much so. It was the case in Armenia as well. It does take, these natural disasters can have obviously significant impact, not only economic, obviously the political, but I think they do expose the weaknesses of governance. I mean, it's such a sort of a direct tool to essentially show the level of resilience in a society, the strength of the institutions, the strength of the state. The state's strength can be measured by how effectively, how quickly the state responds to cases of natural disasters. Bush administration was criticized in the case of the Katrina hurricane in New Orleans. When was it, Todd? My colleague Todd, oh, he can't hear, he has earphones, in early 2000s. Now, let me move on. So that's a little bit on the earthquake. I do want to get to the Armenia-Turkey relations. And here again, as I mentioned early in my presentation, it still is about institutions. This is not a very popular argument to make, or not very particularly exciting argument to make. Institutions are mundane, they're boring, but they do make or break a lot in terms of governance, domestic or foreign. And in the case of, since we're talking about Turkey, domestic, and not just Turkey, obviously, international relations scholarship has been trying to grapple and do a better job in explaining how domestic politics shapes international politics, international relations. So regime type and foreign policy behavior matter. So in this regard, if we look at, I would like now to talk about my argument as to how Turkey's foreign policy is underperforming, whether in the Middle East or in the South Caucasus. And sort of piggybacking on Soli's point about how Turkey will not go against Azerbaijan if you are, and there are all kinds of reasons as to arguments are usually made, but at the end of the day, if you're looking at the size of the economies, it is very strange that a small state, such a small state with a highly problematic state domestically is able to shape and dictate the policy of a large state that is, and I think from a perspective of realism, it's important to interrogate, examine that. My explanation to that is that it has to do with the part, perhaps, it's not the sole explanation, has to do with the fact that foreign policy of Turkey has been deinstitutionalized. I'm hearing that diplomats are sidelined, and deinstitutionalization of foreign policy has made Erdogan's foreign policy very transactional. You have a small win here, you to consolidate bases there at home, but as to institutionally what's good for Turkey in this region, those interests, I would argue, are not advanced. This is a historic moment for Turkey, with Russia declining so spectacularly, whether it's in the Middle East or particularly in South Caucasus. And there's a lot of scholarship on looking at it from a different angle, the rise of multipolarity, the rise of regional powers. Well, if you look at Turkey's quote unquote regionness, the capacity to act as a regional power compared to, say, South Africa, compared to, say, Brazil, Turkey in that scholarship ranks very low, meaning that Turkey does not invest enough in its neighborhood. Its coercive policy alienates more than it gains, and essentially there are limits as to how far you can go in using highly militarized coercive strategies, and that plays out in both cases, in the Middle East as well as in the South Caucasus. Turkey is described often, on the one hand, actually, this argument is particularly pronounced if you consider that Turkey is often described as a cusp power. On the one hand, it is integrated into the Western structures, So it has access to all of these Western political power instruments, and it is also has a presence, is involved in the Middle East. But the Middle East obviously is also a region where with multiple other regional powers vying for power. So, but still, Turkey being so central within the Eurasian continent, you would think that Turkey would do better in terms of establishing regional orders in these regions, and we do not see that. And it's easy to argue, I think, more kind of the prevalent arguments that Armenia needs Turkey more than the other way around. That's true. I mean, it's not, the sizes of economy are not comparable, and the list is very long as to why Armenia needs this more than the other way around. But I think in the 21st century, we are entering a period where small state agency matters. And not having the Armenia's cooperation in the region, and there is an opportunity for it right now. I think it contributes to this phenomenon that Turkey is underperforming in the South Caucasus. That's the arguments that I'm making here. I'm trying to make here, I should say. Now, in terms of, I'll slowly try to finalize. I'm probably going over my time, and I could talk about the 44-day war, its ending, the quality of quote-unquote peace in the region. The scholarship on peace scholarship would describe it, has actually very specific measures, and I'm citing Peter Wallerstein here. Quality peace to be established after in post-war settings, if the communities have dignity, affected, especially the victim communities, if they have security, some stability, if they have predictability, which is, it refers to the lack of, in all of these measures, none of that exists currently in the post-war settings in the region. Interestingly though, and this is why I would argue, and I'll end with this, that Turkey-Armenia relations are a litmus test as to whether or not this declining, the American exit from hegemony, rise of multipolarity, whether the rise of regional solid blocks will be effective in offering governance. Turkey-Armenia relationship is a test as to whether Turkey might be able to actually perform that role in the South Caucasus, simply because I have a slide that I'm not going to share called "Confused About Connectivity, the gap in the rhetoric and reality." The November 9 agreement, Russia brokered ceasefire agreement between Armenia and Azerbaijan, has a point on opening the borders, regional opening, right? And there's a lot of scholarships that has demonstrated that if you promote regional integration first at some level, that makes it easier to solve armed conflicts later on. And Turkey, in this respect, has the full capacity to essentially do what it says, which is unconditional improvement of relations rapprochement with Armenia, right? That is declared. But every time, that's not what Turkey has been doing. It's tied everything. Azerbaijan has a veto power over this relationship. So if the region was completely open, if the borders were open, that would enhance Turkish regional power in the region, as well as help with the resolution of Nagorno-Karabakh conflict. But right now, Turkish foreign policy is very much tied to Azerbaijan's. And in terms of, and I promise, and I will conclude. So this, we're talking about regionalism, which is what my scholarship has been focused on over the past decade or so. Within Armenia, this is also a hard sell in terms of regionalism, right? In Armenia, Gevorg and I have been talking about this, right? Regionalism, is understood, is viewed as a colonial legacy. It is viewed, regional integration is met with lukewarm attitudes and apprehensions for the cost and insecurity it can bring. It is viewed as a geopolitical tool used by regional powers to bully and coerce their way into the South Caucasus. The 3+3 format that was advocated by Turkey and a few others essentially was viewed in Armenia as a way to, again, as a colonial tool to keep Armenia down, Turkey in, and the West out. there is a, so the Armenia-Turkey rapprochement is a catalyst for whether regional diplomacy is possible or not in the region, simply because this is if that if that relationship is improved, that directly shapes the conflict context around Nagorno-Karabakh, elevates Turkey's role in the region, and really helps to solve this conflict. Unless Turkey's strategy is militarized, and which I do not believe is the case, it will be costly for Turkey if that is the strategy, because it has been learning that you're not getting far using militarized strategies. So that is, I'll end on that argument that Turkey's diplomacy is underperforming, and this is not an argument that is probably I'll get points for in Armenia or in Turkey, but I am an academic. I get to brainstorm and have tenure to say it. So I'll stop here.
Thank you, Anna. I'm very happy that you actually went back to the comparison that you and I had talked about, the corruption's effect on the earthquake situation in both countries. And I have to say, hearing you talk about how Turkey is underperforming in foreign policy, depending on who wins the presidential election, I don't know, maybe they want to have you as a consultant to have a more positive foreign policy in Turkey. But anyway, thank you for a very enlightening talk. And now we're going to come to Gevorg. And Gevorg, thank you so much for staying up late for us. You know, it is 8-hour difference, and you are very, very late in Yerevan, Armenia. Thank you, Gevorg. So a few words. Gevorg Ter-Gabrielyan is a writer and an international development leader with many years of experience working in the Caucasus, Balkans, and Central Asia, with a primary focus on Armenia. Since 2007, he leads the Eurasia Partnership Foundation in Armenia, an organization that works on civil society development, democracy, human rights, and peace. Dr. Ter-Gabrielyan has also worked as a Eurasia program manager and senior policy advisor at International Alert, a London-based organization working on conflict transformation and peace building. A prolific writer, Gevorg has published 6 books of fiction and essays, as well as edited several collections on topics such as tolerance, violence, power, education, and critical thinking. In addition to media appearances, Gevorg has delivered about 50 video presentations on the topics of critical thinking, management, leadership, conspiracy theories, and more. Among other degrees, I'd like to add that Dr. Ter-Gabrielyan holds a PhD in Turkic languages from USSR Academy of Sciences, which is how wonderful to hear. Please, Gevorg, tell us your thoughts.
Thank you, Gonca. And thanks everybody for being present, and thank you, Soli and Anna, for your speeches. In fact, these topics are so large that I don't know which parts of them to focus on more. I may just say very few words about some things. On corruption, indeed, it's absolutely correct that the 1988 earthquake in Armenia demonstrated the corruption of the builders. Of course, it was related to the Soviet system, but I don't think it's changed much since then, because there is this builders and architects, going after the big buck. I think it's not only in Armenia and even not only in Turkey, but also in some other places, at the expense of security issues, considerations, and everything like that. So it would be good to have projects and studies on these issues, because very often in my discussions with people who are related to either architecture or construction business, they try to avoid taking responsibility on themselves, saying that, for instance, I don't know, it's the workers who build are the ones who should be blamed, or something like that. So this issue of responsibility is very much there since 1988 for Armenia, and now we see this unfortunate situation in Turkey and Syria and elsewhere, and we are living on this in this part of the world, which means we should be expecting more. Earthquakes here are very frequent things. They happen almost every day around us. So this is one thing. It's an unfortunate parallel, right? I mean, this is something that unites Armenia and Turkey, is corruption that is revealed because of earthquakes. The other thing is, I may say now a few things which are quite disconcerting and daunting, which probably have been already mentioned by you or is understood by many people who are here now. But then I promise to go for some slightly better news by the end of what I'm going to say. But I'm trying to look at the situation from the perspective of an average inhabitant of Armenia of these days. And the situation looks like this. Azerbaijan and Turkey have declared one nation, two states. The war with Azerbaijan, supported by Turkey, actually was a war that has been perceived as waged by Azerbaijan and Turkey against Armenia. I don't mean, and against Karabakh, of course, primarily, but also against Armenia. And I don't mean the official governmental position, but I mean the most frequent common average feeling inside the society that you can encounter at every step. Even obviously nobody wants war in addition to this, because it's a small country, it suffered hugely because of the war. People want dignified peace, which is impossible when you lost a war to authoritarian states to have a dignified peace. What the authoritarian states are doing are trying to impose not even a peace. And today you would probably find a lot of people in Armenia who disagree that the war ended on November 9, 2020. We feel like we are living in war every day. There are victims very frequently, if not every day, then quite frequently. Part of Armenia has been also under attack from Azerbaijan. Karabakh is in a blockade. And so the situation is quite precarious from the perspective of an average Armenian inhabitant. Nobody believes that either Azerbaijan or Turkey want anything good whatsoever for Armenia. It is a very widespread belief that they actually want Armenia not to exist at all. And void in political, like in regional power situation, the problems with Russia, as well as Russian adventures on a global scale, and also particularly the war against Ukraine, the weakening of Russian presence here, which creates power voids. Of course, the power void that is created because of the US foreign policy changes. The entire global situation do not mean any, as I'm now kind of opposing to what Anna was saying, any good news for the regions, because any such power voids are going to be filled in by war rather than peace. That is the feeling. I'm transmitting a feeling that exists in this society. So this is the feeling. At the same time, and also to understand it more, if Azerbaijan wanted to conclude peace, I mean, if you want to conclude peace in any negotiation, in any process, the way you work is you offer carrots and sticks. Here, there are no carrots, it's only sticks. So if you want to conclude peace, you do not jeopardize the chances for peace via an additional attack, an additional provocation. This is the problem, that does not seem that anybody wants to conclude peace. It seems that they are waiting for what will happen to Russia. and everybody, I think everybody in the world is waiting to see what is going to happen with Russia. And depending on the situation, this is a very short-sighted, like very tactical situation. There are no strategies here. Depending on the situation, there will be attempts to maximize power by this or that actor. And because indeed Turkey, it's not just, as I said, it's not just supporting Azerbaijan being a close ally, but this very clear declaration of one nation, two states. Obviously, Armenia-Turkey relations are also falling into the same dynamic. It's good that these small-scale rapprochement kind of actions are taking place, but they are all going to be things like that, whatever happens. They are going to be very minuscule as compared to the pressure that Armenia and Karabakh find themselves under by both actors, in fact, and their global presence and their global propaganda and this PR of their position that they are using quite a lot of power to develop. So this is quite a difficult situation in that respect. At the same time, the government wants peace and the population wants peace too. So the government reacts to every such provocation with a message that we are not going to deviate from the path to try to establish peace. But will it be successful or not is a big question mark, but it is not being decided by the Armenian side to a very high degree. Of course, there are some red lines, but this is a situation which is far away from the red lines. This is a situation where the main negotiating partners do not want really any kind of a peace. This may be also complicated by the clash of the interests of Russia and the West, so to speak. So as you can imagine now that there are EU monitors in Armenia, which is a historical event for the first time ever since independence of Armenia. It's one of the very minor but extremely important elements of the changing geopolitical situation, that it became possible for EU to have monitors on the border of Armenia and Azerbaijan, but Azerbaijan refused to have them on its side, so it's only from the side of Armenia. But instead of welcoming this as a contributive aspect to peace, obviously Russia is extremely upset with this development, wants them out. So this is a very difficult situation. Now, if we try to speak about the kind of good news, we are working on, as you some of you know, we are working on establishing ties between people from Armenia and from Turkey for many years now, and we have had some successes there, and you can call it micropolitics. Sometimes it's called people-to-people contacts or whatever, but there is a lot of work in this direction that has taken place. Of course, not at the scale that politicians can achieve, but still establishing ties and contacts and connections and making people to work, giving them chances to work together, to visit each other. That's one of the major elements in the situation, that Armenia and Turkey have not prohibited the entry of people to each other's country, as different from Armenia and Azerbaijan, for instance. And the other element in this one nation, two states situation is that people from Turkey having their own problems, the society of Turkey, they do not really participate in any of the activities in Azerbaijan, also because of the system there, because it is very difficult to talk about, I don't know, any kind of freedoms or democratic values or anything like that. But this is another issue that it would be good to have a research on that. What is this merger between Turkey and Azerbaijan? What are the aspects of merger that are taking place, and how deep will it go, if it's possible to predict what will happen next? But with Armenia, people, civil society representatives from Turkey have established relations quite a long time now. And despite the fact that they suffered because of the post-coup developments in Turkey and because of this war, these relations do exist. New relations are being established, and this all goes forward. I also want to mention that if anybody from Turkey hears now me, I don't know, because it's late both in Armenia and in Turkey. So maybe some people will watch this on YouTube afterwards. But I remember every day all my friends who are in captivity anywhere in the world, including in Turkey. I remember them every day. If they ever have a chance to hear this, they should know about that. So we have now a situation where our person-to-person contacts, or even sometimes institution-to-institution contacts, continue on. And I have here some of the things that I wanted to show you. For instance, if you can see this, Balat. This is a book research and a kind of, a book that tells a story about the Istanbul district of Balat, which has been historically multi-ethnic district. Stories of their oral histories of their inhabitants, photographs, documents, etc. A wonderful publication done right now, very recently, by a friend and a colleague of ours, Tigran Amirian, and his colleagues from Turkey. This is, one of the examples of a cooperation of many, many different organizations, which is the case for many of our work. And for instance, Hrant Foundation should be mentioned in this respect very strongly, particularly for this project, but not only for this one. Also, for instance, for this one. I like showing books, as probably some of you know, like Todd knows. So it says, if you can see it, Türkiye'de Ermeni kitabı. So again, a very long story. When some people from Armenia, librarians, went to Turkey, and in Istanbul library, they saw a huge amount of Armenian books and manuscripts. And when they asked, and then the next stage, they needed funding to do the work. But the most important thing was that the library accepted this opportunity to give the Armenian scholars a chance to create a catalog of this entire, you can see how heavy it is, right? Yes, of this entire kind of material. And there are about, 70 more such libraries in Turkey, which have Armenian texts, manuscripts, and books. And they, what our librarians tell us is that they are all, or most of them, are welcoming if there is a possibility to continue on this work. So these are some very important elements, also because this book is a publication of the Academy of Sciences of Armenia, of the library, the scientific library of the Academy, which means, it's an institutional cooperation, and you could say at a state level, because the Academy of Sciences is a state-linked institution. What else? There are many such things. We worked on, not me personally, but our colleagues worked on joint studies of the Armenian monuments in Turkey, when Armenian and Turkish or Armenian Turkey-based architects together went to Turkey to examine the situation with the ancient monuments. several times. And now, because of the earthquake, there will be hopefully such a study of one of the earthquake sites again, to see what is the situation with the remnants of Armenian buildings or monuments that existed there before the earthquake and what happened to them because of the earthquake. So I think these are some very important things that are happening despite the political situation. And when
Gevorg, I'm so sorry. I don't want to interrupt you. I want you to go on, but I know that Anna has another meeting to go to. So do you mind? I want to ask one question that was sent to us so that she has just 2 minutes to reply because it can apply to all of you. Sure. Gina, do you mind reading Professor Todd Gerns's question so that Anna maybe can jump in and give just her short version of an answer, and then because I know she has to go, and then we can resume, Gevorg, because I completely appreciate everything you're explaining to us, and I have more questions, but unfortunately we only have 15 minutes left. So do you have it, Gina, or should I read it?
I have it. Dr. Todd Gerns from Stonehill College, Associate Professor of History, here with us today. Question is, the term rapprochement denotes the reestablishment of cordial diplomatic relations, which is how the panel is framed. However, considering the historical depth and complexity of the conflict between Turkey and Armenia, wouldn't reconciliation be a more appropriate term? And I'll put that in the chat as well for the panelists to reflect on.
Thanks. If Anna has some quick thoughts, I'd appreciate.
Anna can turn around and just tell Todd right there.
Todd is right here. He told me he submitted a question, and I told him that I will research and prepare, but I did not have time to. I did write about that question, the issue of reconciliation, a while back in an article, academic article, essentially boring article. If I say academic, you should understand it. But I put that article on the chat, in the chat.
Okay, thank you.
So you can, it might be behind a paywall. I don't know whether it's open or not. I can, those of you who are interested, I'm happy to locate it and I'll email it to Gonca and then she can share. The term reconciliation, I think I've grappled with that term a lot. And I think I get in that article quite extensively. Very quickly, I think one issue that I have with the term is that it assumes it's an interpersonal relationship concept to me. Reconciliation assumes complete transformation of relations, which is easier, more manageable, more realistic between individuals or between two small communities. But when we talk about reconciliation between states, two states, that I'm not sure if that's the right word. I think in terms of, on the one hand, let's say the two leaders, Erdogan and I don't know, Pashinyan met and there was some agreement, I don't know, some exchange of, I could go on visiting the genocide memorial. Would that be a reconciliation if these two leaders at the top level engaged in something like that, even if President Erdogan apologized, right? Probably not, because the bulk of the society may or may not be there. I would argue, though, it's much more, I think, much more important to me, I would say much more significant would be if Turkish society has faced a kind of reckoned with it, because it would have strengthened, again, I'm an institutionalist, it would have strengthened the Turkish democracy, it would have strengthened its deliberative capacities. And I think the same strategies of denialism that have been mobilized to suppress civil society groups that wanted conversation on it, those same muscles are now exercised, have been exercised in suppressing everybody else. And I'm making this comment largely from my own experience being raised in the Soviet Union. This is also a society that hasn't reckoned it with its history. And I think societies who are unable to do that, it does serious damage to their political culture. So I would say that if living in Armenia, I would feel much more secure if Turkey moved towards or became stronger, deeper democracy. Reconciliation and engagement would have been much more easier, much more realistic. So I guess what I'm saying that reconciliation at the state level, it means it matters as to what we mean by it. Whether what kind of a transformation it requires, it expects. Do we, again, it'd be useful to look at Japan-South Korea relations remain problematic, even though there have been apologies that have been going on, right, that Japan has issued. So there are some studies who looked at those issues. But I think overall, reconciliation versus rapprochement, there is all kinds of other issues. I do believe that my last book is about connectivity. I do believe that if societies come in contact, reconciliation is not an overnight process. More contact, more engagement, that takes time. Formal apology from Turkey, would that be great? Of course, that would be great. Perhaps it would get some people in Turkey to ask and think questions, but I think reckoning inside Turkey is much, much more important than, I would say, than direct as to what's happening between the two states. And I'm realizing I'm kind of sounding like Hrant Dink as I'm saying this, but it took me a while to get there. I used to look at the genocide issue as a Turkey-Armenia issue. I don't view it that way anymore because I simply am realizing that the costs of denialism, of not facing your history, are enormous. We see this in the case of Putin in Russia, where he cited imperial history to engage in this war of conquest in Ukraine. We see authoritarianism inside Turkey deepening. All of these things are very, very worrisome. And even in Armenian society hasn't reckoned with its Soviet history as well. But Gevorg is so well positioned to talk about some of that. And I'm sure Soli has ideas as well. I do have to leave in a few minutes, in actually 2 minutes. So I apologize. Thank you very much for the invitation. It was great meeting you, Soli, and thank you all who joined in.
Anna, thank you so much. Thank you so much, Anna. Thank you for making time for us. I actually want to get back to Gevorg and then Soli because I have 2 questions, but I need to ask do you have like a few more minutes? Because if I ask a question and somebody answers, it's going to be later than 4:30. Can you stick around for like 10 minutes, maybe 15 minutes? So the question for Gevorg is actually something that is related to what he was talking about with this micropolitics, because I have heard that after especially the latest war in Nagorno-Karabakh, that civil society actors in Turkey and Armenia, there has been more tension than there was before, that even people who used to have good relations within the civil society world in 2 countries had actually experienced some really bad feelings against each other. And I wonder if you can say a few words about that and if things are slowly changing or not, because I think that's related to how I interrupted you. Can you tell us a few more things about that?
Yeah, Gonca, these are, yes, indeed. I mean, the war has changed everything. When Anna was talking about the opportunities that Turkey could have had if it established relations with Armenia, I remembered the 2008 and the football diplomacy. At that time, yes, no questions asked. Because of this war, obviously the feelings of, depression and animosity and everything in the Armenian society are running very, very deep. So those who are talking about rapprochement, apart from the government, are maybe met with a huge misunderstanding and with challenge, in fact. At the same time, some or many connections exist because it's not, there are some connections which are, some ties which are stronger than any kind of political ups and downs. So there are enough people in both Turkey and Armenia who would agree to talk to each other respectfully and think about what can be done for the benefits of their societies.
Thank you. And I promise I'm not going to go over 4:45 at the latest. I do want to ask something of Soli because he knows so much about the domestic politics and foreign policy in Turkey. But, I've heard you speaking about the main opposition leader, Kemal Kılıçdaroğlu, and how the fact that he comes from the Alevi minority in Turkey, and that if he were to, we don't know what's going to happen, if he were to become president in a country such as Turkey, that actually would be a very a welcome and positive factor in the governance of such a country. Now, do you think that if he were to be elected president, would that he would have a different approach vis-a-vis the Armenians, whether be it the small number left in Turkey or the much larger number in the diaspora outside?
I'm not well placed to
Soli, it's
answer
for
that.
Soli. It's
Yes.
for Soli. Yeah, thank you.
Sorry that Anna is gone, but I'm afraid we have conflated far too many levels, and things just don't work that way. Because if we're going to talk about state-to-state levels and what Turkey had done with Azerbaijan and stuff, then you can find yourself in an endless discussion about the fact that Azerbaijan proper was invaded 20% of its territory. And the Westerners were actually pretty happy to treat this issue as a frozen conflict. Nobody really gave a damn. And at the end of the day, and that is how things happen at the interstate level, Turkey had, by the way, with the help of Israel, I would think, and Azerbaijan, they actually cut the Gordian knot. Now, that's one level of looking at things. It is a much less sensitive way of looking at things. It's a very hard, realistic way of looking at things, but that's one thing. That's one way. Secondly, think of Levon Ter-Petrosyan, probably a tragic figure. Turks and Armenians, or Karabakh Armenians, basically that killed that man politically. So the two countries did not have their own domestic problems in terms of the relations between the two countries, but also their domestic order not yet put in place in the 1990s. It was a missed opportunity. Unfortunately, it was a missed opportunity. Now, when we come to today, I think a lot of people have lost their illusions, and it's very good to lose your illusions. And I don't expect Kılıçdaroğlu to change Turkey's policy vis-a-vis Armenia or in terms of relations between the Armenian community and Turkey overnight. He cannot do it. There are too many institutional barriers to do that. There is a lot of legacy and all that. And you can also argue, remember, we always work in the context of Nixon to China syndrome. Only hardliners can actually take what would be considered risky steps. We have already gone beyond that, though. We cannot. It will take a while to go back to the period of football diplomacy when Hrant was alive, and there was a genuine dialogue. Okay, since the murder of Hrant and the fact that that murder has never really been clarified, we have gone backwards, undoubtedly. But maybe it is in the nature of this particular relation that first and foremost it will have to be state-to-state relations that will have to be ameliorated. Then we can move on. But look, if you look at it from a more optimistic side or positive side, flights are back. People can fly to Azerbaijan from Istanbul and back. Erdogan in his own way, it was a pretty gauche way of expressing it, but at some point apparently there were close to 100,000 Armenians actually working in Turkey. And to the best of my knowledge, there has not really been any major incidents of harassment or, God forbid, even worse things. If the borders open, in my view, things will get a lot. Will move forward a lot more rapidly, I would imagine. But there is too much baggage on both sides. The issue of Azerbaijan-Armenia relations obviously complicate Turkey-Armenia relations. And I haven't really thought through what Professor again asked, that is reconciliation versus rapprochement. Quite frankly, I didn't, so I cannot really address that. But my hunch is state-to-state relations will will pave the way and will move forward only after that happens. And I am truly not very pessimistic about that happening in a relatively short period of time, not immediately, because once, as Anna said, we have deinstitutionalized everything, including our foreign policy. Once foreign policy is reinstitutionalized, and if we have some kind of sense of what the aftermath of the Russia-Ukraine war is going to be, things may move faster in Southern Caucasus as well. We'll have to think about it in more regional terms, I would expect. But mind you, finally, excuse me, my final point. I mean, the Iranians are very unhappy that Armenia and Turkey are talking at all. They are very, the relations with Azerbaijan are getting tenser and tenser. And they don't particularly like the Turkish presence, definitely in Azerbaijan, as neither do they like the Israeli presence. But a reconciliation between Turkey and Armenia as states is something that the Iranians don't like, and they must have a lot of tools to try to block it as much as they can.
Thank you, Soli. And Gevorg, I'm just going to give you like a couple of minutes if as the last word to answer a little bit to what Professor Gerns asked, if you have some final comments about that.
Reconciliation.
Yes.
Yeah, well, it's well known. I fully agree with what Anna said. Reconciliation is a very long process. It doesn't happen overnight. When we're talking about Armenia-Turkey relations, we don't even use rapprochement. We use normalization. It's the most neutral term because even rapprochement means a lot more than just establishing diplomatic relations, normal relations, and opening land border. So the less you ask for, the better, because you don't get at all, whatever at all, for so many years now, that it's better to be kind of to err on the side of realistic chances rather than more. Because indeed, reconciling takes a lot of discussions on history and everything. Changing policies of education for the societies. Societies for ages have been educated this or that way, like there was no genocide or whatever. So this is not really a realistic kind of concept, I would say.
Thank you. You know, we started late and I really apologize. So I'm not going to ask you, especially Gevorg, to stay up even later. I think this discussion could go on forever because it is a very large and big subject and very complicated. I thank you so much, all of you. And I'm sorry, Anna, but I will probably talk to her later. Thank you, Soli. Thank you, Gevorg. Thank you, audience, whoever was able to join us. Thank you for being with us. And if you have any other questions, let us know. And the recording will be up on the Neighbors in Memory website. And whoever wanted to, if you know of people who want to see it, we will be putting it up there and sending you a message about that. Thank you very much. Thank you, everybody. And see you later, I hope.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.